Remember when Robin died? A question that for the longtime DC reader conjures up the question of which one and which time. In this case, we're talking about Damian Wayne, who lost his life in Batman Inc. #8. He would return in Batman and Robin 38 in early 2015. In the interim years, some interesting events took place. One was the reintroduction of another famous in nerd circles Robin, Carrie Kelley. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and we're going to talk about how the first fully fleshed out female Robin nearly took that mantle on in the main continuity at the time universe, only to vanish off the pages, seemingly into oblivion.
Carrie Kelley. Robin.
First up, just who is Carrie Kelley? This character debuted in 1986 in The Dark Knight Returns #1, written by Frank Miller with art by Miller, inks by Klaus Janson, and colors by Lynn Varley. The Dark Knight Returns was a 4-issue storyline. It would come to be a pivotal moment in Batman storytelling history. Some nowadays will say for equal parts good and ill, based on what it's left in its wake. A lot of deconstructions trying to be The Dark Knight Returns, just like there are a lot trying to be Watchmen. But it also led to some interesting storytelling as well, and that can't be overlooked. This story took place in a future time, starring an aging Bruce Wayne and a cynical near dystopian world. It was filled with commentary on superheroes, fascism, the media, and it had some rather dark tongue-in-cheek takes at times. It was gritty, brooding, and at times brutal. This was by design. On the concept, Miller stated, oh yes, I have quotes. Of course I do. With Batman, you've got a character that you can describe in just a few seconds. His parents were murdered by criminals, he's warring on crime for the rest of his life. He was created in 1938, and the character was just ruthless in his methods, terrifying to criminals. Over the years, that got softened and softened because people started thinking that comics had to be just for kids, and Batman had to be made much nicer, and eventually no kid could relate to him anymore. I would debate that statement, but that's not what we're here for. So Miller was looking to bring some of that edge back, but some of the ideas require that they not take place in the standard Batman continuity. I mean, the series ends with Batman dying, or at least it was supposed to, but then they had to leave stuff open because it was doing so well. He could come back. Spoilers for a series from 1986. The Dark Knight Returns deconstructed a lot of ideas in the Batman mythos, some more cleverly than others, and it really ended up leaving an impact. In an era before every single storyline was collected for the trades, this one was. It was separated, pulled out to the point where some assumed that it was always written to be a separate graphic novel. Many have been inspired by this Batman story and tried to work with similar themes or similar tone, similar art design, or just structure, 16 panels, and those have had varying degrees of success. The creation of the series itself is fascinating. There were artistic disputes, many drafts, late and missed deadlines, because Miller felt that they stifled artistic independence. And into all of this, Carrie entered the scene. Her inclusion is credited to a suggestion from comic writer / artist John Byrne to Miller, telling him Robin must be a girl and doing a sketch that Miller liked. Kelley functions as a bright spot in this dark world. Even visually, she fulfills that function. This world has a Batman who's seen a city crumble, is riddled with regrets, and can do nothing else but return to the mantle. Kelley is a stark contrast to Batman in this world and provides an updated rendition of Robin's initial function, aside from relating to the youth, because he was there to draw in a younger audience, but then also over the years, layers would be added to that, just in how he was juxtaposed against Batman. Kelley does that here. Side note, you can see a fair bit of some of what went into Batman Beyond in these Dark Knight Returns issues. Kelley is tenacious and takes on the role of Robin herself. Her portion of the story and her enthusiasm were endearing. She stood out in terms of Robins, especially at the time, as this is pre-Tim Drake, the third Robin, who would also be proactive in seeking out the role of Robin. At the time, Jason was being reworked into a dark, brooding character. He was heading down a path that would eventually see him die. Dick had been Nightwing for years at that point. At the time, Carrie was fresh, exciting, and a reminder of how Robin used to be, but repackaged for this at the time new and intriguing take on Batman. She would prove to be decently popular with fans and remembered fondly. Now, in the post-Crisis on Infinite Earths continuity, which she would debut into, she wouldn't really exist in the main universe per se, even though the multiverse was dead and it would have remained so for 20 years. Still, it wasn't really hinted at that this was the definitive future that the DC universe was headed towards. It was pretty bleak. Superman controlled by the government, media out of control with inaccurate biased news, a haunted broken Batman, just whatever was happening with Catwoman. So this was relegated to an idea of a loose future, more along the lines of an Elseworld, and then later it would concretely be placed on Earth 31. Now The Dark Knight Returns would get a sequel, largely because of how well it did, The Dark Knight Strikes Again, but that would be years later in 2001, and it is nowhere near as lauded as its predecessor, nor is the sequel to that, The Master Race, or the sequel to that, The Golden Child. Carrie Kelley appears in all of these, but specifically when it comes to Strikes Again and Master Race, in Strikes Again she had taken on the mantle of Catgirl, for reasons, and then in Master Race and beyond, in that universe she was Batwoman, which does make more sense. But in terms of the main continuity, there would be hints of her in potential futures. This largely because by the time that those references started happening, the third Robin, Tim Drake, had firmly cemented himself in that role. He had risen up in the 90s and become quite popular, sustaining his own solo series for over a decade and becoming a core part of many teams. And when his star would begin to fall, it would be because of the introduction of another Robin, not Carrie Kelley, but Damian Wayne, who was pretty polarizing at the start and still is in some circles. He's definitely more accepted now, time of recording, than he was when he first debuted. People celebrated when he died. I remember that in some online forums. This little 10-year-old being skewered on panel, people being like, yay, it's over. Which actually brings us back to Carrie. Now, Damian debuted in 2006. He had kinda debuted earlier, but this version of Damian that people know, 2006, then he died in 2013. That was during the New 52, which was a huge line-wide reboot that DC did of its entire universe. Some titles were more affected than others. Batman was overall less impacted because it was selling well, and so a lot of things going on there were allowed to continue. Also, notoriously and infamously, there were some miscommunications at the start of the New 52 that led to some details just not syncing up line-wide. Now, Batman got to keep going, but this also meant that certain characters vanished for a bit in accordance with the whole no legacy thing that was being pushed in the New 52. Even though Batman still had a lot of supporting characters, some of his were gone, like Stephanie Brown and Cassandra Cain. They were just MIA for a bit. Which meant you had lost the first in-continuity female Robin, with Stephanie, even though she had started off as Spoiler, and a Batgirl, actually two Batgirls, because both had been Batgirl. Now, when Damian died, a gap was left in the role of Robin. Tim was Red Robin at that point, the codename he had moved on to with Damian's arrival. And so the Batman and Robin series began to take on different subheadings during the period that Damian was dead. And it was in Batman and Robin number 19, which had the title Batman and Red Robin, that Carrie Kelley made her New 52 and hence main universe debut. She was brought into the 2010s by Peter J. Tomasi and Patrick Gleason. And side note, the arc of Batman grieving for Damian is unhinged. I had forgotten how off the rails it went. If you want to see Batman go harder than when Tim tried to bring Connor back to life, this is the story arc for you. In this issue, for example, he deconstructs Frankenstein to try and force him to help him resurrect Damian using some corpses he stole from the hospital because they donated their bodies to science. Also, he backhands Tim. Par for the course. Never a good time to be a former Robin around Batman after his current Robin has died, or after he gets left at the altar. Being backhanded by Batman, a tradition. But we're not here for that, we're here for Carrie, who is actually featured on a wraparound version of this cover in a pose very reminiscent of her Dark Knight images. And the cover flat out asks if she's gonna be his new partner. They just open right on her and they spend a bit of time building her up, setting up her personality and information. She's a theater nerd, she's in college, she doesn't take any nonsense. There cannot be a pinch in death more sharp than this is. I beseech you, sir, harm not yourself with your vexation, I am senseless of your wrath. A touch more rare subdues all pangs, all fears, past hope and in despair, that way past grace. Hey baby, I love redheads. Want to pull over and share your pizza? No thanks, that's okay. You can have the whole thing. Ah, my eyes. He didn't say that. I'm just adding it because it hit him square in the face. Is it weird that I'm wondering if that pizza was hot and hoping it wasn't? Sleazy pickup attempt does not equal third-degree burns or blindness, at least not in my opinion. I don't know why I made it so extreme in my head, because this whole run is extreme. Now, Carrie is going to Wayne Manor to see Damian, because in an admittedly pretty clunky introduction technique, he was hanging out with her for months. He just kept it a secret, but she was always there. We just didn't know. That kind of sitcom approach of, look, a cousin you never heard of. And why was a college sophomore hanging out with a 10-year-old? Well, because she was giving him acting lessons without confirming if she had proper consent from his guardians or ever speaking to them. It's a mite odd. The connection is tenuous and questionable if you think about it too long. Now, Damian owes her 1,000 for 10 sessions, so 100 per session. Girl, really? That's it? Bruce decides to be odd and track her down to give her a check for way more just so he can see who Damian was hanging out with. And when he gets there, she's at a party, a costume party, dressed as Robin. Do you get it? It's both homage and foreshadowing. Now, Carrie wants to actually hear from Damian, and Bruce is just being extra sketchy, so she's not sold in the whole he's fine, he just went away to boarding school and never told anybody. She feels like he dropped off the face of the earth, and she wants to know what happened to him, so she takes it upon herself to find out. This issue was called Denial, by the way. They were doing a 5 stages of grief thing. The next chapter is called Rage because he's angrier than just regular anger. Rage. In this issue of Bruce is Unhinged, we have to deal with Jason because this was Batman and Red Hood. So he lures Jason to hang out with him on a mission under the guise of needing and respecting him, only to bring him to the spot where he died, ambush him, and then tell him if he cared about him, he'd try to figure out how he came back to life for him. I just needed you to know that. Rereading these was wild. I had to share all of the roller coaster of feelings. You know what though? At least this is treating it like Damian's death mattered. Looking at you, Dick and Dark Crisis. Oh, they've all died before. This is trying to sell you on the idea that this matters, it's important, even if he's coming back, which at the time it wasn't entirely clear. It seemed like it might be, but also there were some signs pointing to that it mightn't be. And Carrie was one of those signs. Carrie does end up at Wayne Manor and stands up to Bruce and says that she cannot be bought. She's only taking the money that she's owed. And she still wants to know where Damian is. She hits it off with Damian's dog Titus and with Alfred. And even Bruce is interested to hear more about his son and his interests and why he was taking these acting lessons. Alfred ends up hiring her on the DL to take care of Titus. So she was being set up as being around. She next appeared in issue 22. And there was a whole plot of Bruce splicing together a message from audio bites of Damian of him being recorded on mission and in the mansion to appease her that he was abroad studying. And Bruce does end up accepting that she's going to be around and taking care of Titus. And Alfred comments about how nice it is to have the kind of youthful energy in the house again, and Bruce depressingly agrees. He's kind of like, yeah, it was, wasn't it? Which of my other children can I traumatize with my grief this issue? It was rough. And then as for Carrie, she's gone, vanished, never mentioned again. They just stopped talking about her. Guess Alfred had to go back to looking after Titus. Now it was clear if one was reading this, or even if one reads it now, that that's not what was initially intended. There was way too much time spent building her up, giving her a personality, tying her to Damian, making her have connections with Bruce, with Alfred. They were working on building a new 52 in-universe connection, not just riding on nostalgia of, oh, remember Dark Knight Returns? Carrie Kelley was Robin. Even though it seemed like they wanted her to take that role on again, they were trying to have her earn it and have the audience come to like her, this version of her. And indeed, the solicit for issue 24 had her on the cover, but when it came out, she had been replaced by Harvey Bullock. The audacity. Now, years later, Tomasi would comment on the fact that there had indeed been a whole story arc planned for her that was suddenly canceled. Abruptly, I say. On the platform formerly known as Twitter, it went as follows. Sometimes I remember Carrie Kelley showed up in the main DCU and then completely disappeared. At Patrick Gleason, at Peter J. Tomasi, mind shedding a light on what happened? Tomasi replies with, let's just say she was a big, in all caps, part of our approved storyline, but unfortunately was axed at the last sec. It was gonna be wild, but alas not meant to be. That X rebrand of Twitter time of recording. Still not used to it. Also, based on how wild the rest of this run was, I believe it. I want to see it. I want to go to there. So Carrie Kelley could have had a much bigger role in the main continuity, maybe even a permanent one. I mean, if she had taken on the role of Robin, you could have just renamed the series Batman and Robin again, and it would have still worked. You wouldn't have had to wait for Damian to come back to do that. With Damian dead at that point, and Stephanie and Cass gone, it does make me wonder, would Damian have stayed dead? Was that the ultimate plan? Or was the plan to bring him back at some point and then there could have been some tension, or not, because they established that these two were already friends, but it would have been interesting if there had been a bit of a warming up period to this idea that his mantle had been passed on. There were things you could have done with it. And then maybe she could have moved on to another role, or maybe Damian could have tried to be a regular kid for a bit. Stories. There were stories there. Just the idea of a universe where Damian never came back. Discuss. The dynamic they were setting up for Carrie and Bruce, and hence this new Robin and Batman, was a strong reworking of the one from The Dark Knight Returns, featuring some Tim Drake and Batman Beyond energy. You could tell it was building up to her finding out about Damian. The how she knew him could have been a bit less awkwardly handled. At least I find it awkward. If you don't, let me know. So the idea of Damian wanting to take acting classes is interesting, and the idea that it was because he wanted to learn what it felt like to be somebody else, tragic. The potential for Carrie's dynamics with the Bat fam were intriguing, but it was not to be. Do you think that's for the best? Do you prefer her off in her own separate universe? Do you feel that she works better in that kind of future dark timeline? Do you feel like they're trying to stuff too many Bat fam characters into the main continuity as is and we don't need any more? Or would you have been happy to see her join the fold, enter the family? It was very abrupt how she left, but at the same time where they cut her off, it made the most sense for her not to return if you were just gonna not mention her again. It was a hard cut, but it works. But all of these are just my thoughts and I want to hear yours. Would you want to see Carrie Kelley return? Do you think she would have been a good foil for Damian? Tell me things down below. And while you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, hit that bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some time to spend discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.